To today's video. Today is Thursday, July 31st, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Nevada and a now challenging Democrat in the 2026 governor's race, as Attorney General Aaron Ford has announced just 2 days ago that he will be seeking one of the highest offices in the state of Nevada. A huge announcement, and one that puts Democrats within very competitive territory of winning this governor's race next November in a midterm cycle that is expected to be way more in favor of the Democrats than the most recent midterm and presidential cycles. And this news from Aaron Ford shows that there is an appetite to take on Republican governors across the country, and specific to a state that is unequivocally a battleground state, not only on the presidential level, not only on the statewide level, but in almost every single degree. The majority of their House districts are toss-up districts. The governor's race is always an exciting one to watch. Of course, the presidential election is close in Nevada. We talk about it constantly and always. And looking at the 2026 cycle, there was large anticipation that maybe Nevada would go largely uncontested in this upcoming midterm. Now, Aaron Ford, I think that many of us who, closely have been tracking his politics and his maneuvering within the state of Nevada, has been making a huge name for himself in the suing of the Trump administration and going after Donald Trump in a variety of different ways, that he was gearing up to run for governor across the state. But if Aaron Ford had actually not put forth this bid for governor, there was a strong possibility that Joe Lombardo would be left to have an easier pathway to re-election rather than run against someone who had been elected statewide before and is currently serving in office. Now, Nevada is a unique point of interest for Democrats because in the last presidential election, Donald Trump won this state, being the first Republican to do so in 20 years. Every election since George W. Bush, Democrats have won it twice with Obama. They won it with Clinton, they won it with Biden, and then they lost it this last presidential election. And a big reason from what we saw in the exit polling data and the preliminary polling data was that a lot of voters in Nevada cared a lot about the southern border crisis. They cared a lot about the way that they perceived the handling of the southern border from the Biden administration and how they saw issues specific to immigration being handled by a would-be Trump administration. And so we saw at the ballot box, for the first time again in 20 years, Republicans won this state, and they did so by a margin of about 4 points across the state. That Biden won by 2.4, that Hillary Clinton had won by 2.4, that Obama won by 5 and 10 points. I mean, Nevada had been a state that, although competitive, had still been historically more Democratic than Republican. That all came to a halt in 2024. But it's still a point of interest because in the coinciding House races in Nevada, Democrats actually won 3 out of the 4 races. And these districts, while, meant to be more favorable for Democrats, they were still competitive from the very beginning. And yet in the first district, the Democratic incumbent wins by 8. In the third district, they win by 2. In the fourth district, they win by 8. These are districts here that, yes, are more lopsided in favor of the Democratic Party. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump actually won the majority of the districts in the state of Nevada. And so to see this now, having, Democrats ahead in 75% of the districts certainly makes a difference. But an even better example about why Democrats are hopeful about their prospects in Nevada is that Jackie Rosen, the incumbent Democratic senator, outpaced Kamala Harris by a pretty significant amount and defeated Sam Brown, the Republican nominee, by a margin of about 2 points across the state. Keep in mind, Trump is winning this state by 4. Democrats are winning the Senate election, again, a statewide election, by about 2, meaning it's a 6-point shift just from race to race. And so looking at the 2026 election, a lot of Democrats have looked to it and said, who are we going to run in the governor's race? Who are they going to get out there and challenge Joe Lombardo in the 2026 election? Because Nevada actually, interestingly enough, although historically has voted for Democrats on the presidential level, has actually had about equal time having Republicans in office and Democrats in office since the beginning of the century. When you look at the year 2000, you'll find, 2002, first midterm here, you're going to see that Republicans had a locked down advantage in the governor's race. 4 years later, we saw Nevada got much narrower, though the Republicans still pulled ahead. In 2010, maintained itself as a Republican state with Brian Sandoval, and brace yourself for this one. In 2014, Nevada went by a whopping 47 percentage points in favor of the Republican Party. It wasn't until 2018 that we saw the Democrats reclaim the governorship. Even going back to 1988, you'll find Republicans still maintained an advantage in Nevada. So not even equal time. I think that, my understanding of that was slightly off. Not equal time, about a 4-to-1 ratio of Republican governance in Nevada over Democratic governance. I must have gotten my wires crossed thinking about the Senate elections or House elections here, but Steve Sisolak defeated Adam Laxalt, who was the Republican Attorney General, and did so because 2018 was a blue wave year. So fast forward to 2022, guess what happens? Steve Sisolak loses. Not by a massive amount, but he was more unpopular. And also at this time, too, Joe Biden had seen that in a lot of states, there was some reversions in support from the last election. In some cases, right, there was enough support that residually speaking, Democrats were able to have some pretty solid victories. Republicans ran really lackluster candidates across the board, but Joe Lombardo was not lackluster. He was one of the stronger nominees or candidates that could have been the nominee for Republicans, and he was. And he won that nomination pretty clearly, was able to win in the general election, but now he's faced up against a Democrat and a strong Democrat in a Democratic wave year. In that coinciding race, you might actually find interesting that Joe Lombardo was elected to the governorship. There was also a coinciding Senate election where Catherine Cortez Masto, the Democratic incumbent, won re-election against Adam Laxalt, yes, the same Adam Laxalt, who ran for governor by a margin of about a point in 2022. So it was a pretty significant, victory here for Democrats to see that in a 2022 year, given the national environment, if Biden only won the state by about 2.5 points, but the national environment was shifting 8 points to the right, Nevada should have easily swung to the GOP. And it did so to some degree on the governor's level, but it did not on the Senate level. But this actually isn't the major point that I think shows that Aaron Ford is a formidable candidate. Not only was there a Senate election that coincided with the governor's race, but every other statewide election in Nevada followed suit, including Aaron Ford's race, where he defeated his Republican incumbent by a margin of about 8 points across the state. That is massive. That is a massive margin, especially in a state where Republicans are getting, 49% on the governor's level and winning an election that way. Aaron Ford is getting the outright majority. No other candidate across the board is going to be able to say they did that with 52% of the vote. And when you look at Lombardo too, 497,000 votes, 511,000 for Aaron Ford. And even looking back at 2018, the margin was actually less. So he increased in popularity, increased in electability, and voters largely looked at him and said, okay, I'd vote for Aaron Ford, even if I'm voting for Republicans for Senate, even if I'm voting for Republicans for governor, I am voting for the Democrat in the Nevada Attorney General's race. And this pipeline of attorney generals running for governor happens all the time. In 2024, Josh Stein, the incumbent attorney general of North Carolina, ran for governor in 24, won by 15. In 2016, when Donald Trump won North Carolina, incumbent attorney general Roy Cooper, who's now running for Senate in North Carolina, ran in that race, outpaced the Democratic ticket, Hillary Clinton, and won against a Republican incumbent. In 2022, incumbent attorney general Josh Shapiro won in the state of Pennsylvania by a whopping 15 percentage points. He had been the most voted for Democrat in state history and still holds that title and distinction in the state because he did better than Biden in 2020, the highest turnout election we've seen since before the sinking of the Titanic. Fast forward 2 years later, and he's winning the governorship. Now, Joe Lombardo isn't a Republican that's going to be caught sleeping at the wheel. He will run a good campaign, and it will be undoubtedly competitive. But the last time there was a Republican incumbent in Nevada, Republicans won with 71% of the vote in this state. Democrats actually didn't even run a candidate. So interestingly enough, that the majority of Democrats voted for none of these candidates rather than one in particular. That was a truly fascinating race. Huge differences there, especially in primary turnout, because nobody wanted to run against Brian Sandoval. Nobody wanted to challenge him. And nobody really could. He won with 71% of the vote, and it was the best performing governor's race for any Republican, any Democrat across the board in the 2014 race. Massive victory there for Sandoval. But again, getting back to 2026, Lombardo is popular. That is what makes this tricky. If there was to be a super unpopular incumbent, then yes, it'd be easy to take on Lombardo, but also keep in mind that every governor is popular. The Morning Consult did some data points here where they find that people are largely happy with their locally elected constituents, which actually makes a little bit more sense than you might think. Now, I don't believe that Lombardo has a plus 21 net approval, but I do believe he is popular. And that will make this race much more competitive than if he was just a Republican who got lucky and had nothing to show for it. Because he's also, too, tempered by the Democratic state legislature in the state of Nevada. When you take a look at the overall state government, you're going to find that the state Senate and the state Assembly are pretty lopsided in favor of Democrats. For instance, in the Nevada State Senate, Democrats have 13 seats, Republicans have 8. Even though Republicans won the popular vote in the last election, Democrats still maintained the majority. Why? because they drew the districts in favor of Democrats. Even more alarming for the Republicans in the Nevada Assembly elections, though Democrats lost the results by about 8 points across the board, Democrats still maintained nearly a 2-to-1 ratio of an advantage in the Nevada State Assembly, which means in 2026, it could be more lopsided in favor of the Democratic Party. But the point is that a Republican governor who is tempered by a Democratic legislature often cannot implement policies that may be at odds with an electorate that might be inclined to vote for Democrats in every election but the presidential. And looking at this opportunity for Democrats with Aaron Ford, they do have an electable Democrat who actually outpaced this incumbent governor. So looking at 2026, this is a huge get for Democrats, given that there probably weren't going to be other people that could come into this race. Steve Sisolak floated the idea that he might run again. It looks like Aaron Ford, who's already secured the endorsements from all three Democratic incumbents in the House, both Democratic senators, obviously, on the Senate side. And that is huge, because even if Sisolak wants it, there's a chance that voters don't want to run the risk of running the former governor and instead give Aaron Ford that nomination outright. And so thinking about this 2026 race, Lombardo is vulnerable. He's not going to be easily defeated. But this just gave Democrats more than a fighting chance. It gave Democrats a candidate to rally around, and one that has a proven track record electorally and in terms of executive authority. And voters know Aaron Ford. The only interesting thing about this is that we have yet to see any real data points. The last poll conducted was in May of 2023. I mean, that is a very long time ago. That is over 2 years ago, the last time there was a poll, and Lombardo was at 51%, Aaron Ford was at 30%. A lot of this had to do with low name ID. But there hasn't been any data points since then. And I think Lombardo comes out in this race being in a position where he has really strong points to say, I can run for re-election and do well. And I think he could. But could is the word I want to stress. Because in the last time we saw a Democratic election in Nevada was in 2018, and Democrats won. They defeated Adam Laxalt, who was the incumbent attorney general. And while you might be able to say, wait, isn't Aaron Ford the same attorney general, the same position that Adam Laxalt was in when he lost? Sure. But 2018 and 2026 are going to look a lot better for Democrats than 2018 did for Adam Laxalt as a Republican. Because if it was 2022, maybe the governor's result would have looked different, just like it did for Joe Lombardo in the 2022 race. But the 2026 environment might be enough for Democrats to win. Because when you take a look at these numbers here, if you just shift these national margins by about 5 points in favor of the Democratic Party, Nevada flips. And Democrats, sure, they get Nevada, brings them to 25 seats across the board. But again, Nevada flips as the first state to go in favor of the Democratic Party. Not Georgia, not Florida, not Iowa, not New Hampshire. Nevada. And so looking at the 2026 race, Democrats have their candidate. Democrats have a candidate who can do very well in the general election. And the question is, how well does he run his campaign? And how well does the incumbent do as well? Because Lombardo is not an idiot. Lombardo is a Republican who was able to win in 22 when many other Republicans could not. He was the beacon of hope that showed Republicans they could win Nevada in the 2024 election. And it ended up being one of the most voting for Republican states across the board. Nevada and North Carolina share a margin in the last race. Nevada 3.1, North Carolina 3.2. That in 2016 was entirely unheard of. They voted 6 points away from each other. North Carolina, Trump +4, Nevada, Clinton +2, 6 points away from each other. Seriously. And so thinking, about where you are and thinking about the election and the dynamics that surround it in 2026, Democrats will have the upper hand and can use that to their advantage in the governor's race. But Lombardo will put up a fight, but I do not believe the Democrats would have won this race with anybody but Ford. I even think Sisolak would have faced some strong opposition on the governor's level. And so thinking about this race, Democrats again lucked out. They've been lucking out in terms of the candidates that they are getting to run across the board, and Aaron Ford is one of them. And as I look ahead to the 2026 races, Nevada will likely be one of the closest governor elections we will see across the board. And the question is, do Democrats prevail? Today, I'd argue that they might, but it's still going to be close. It's still going to be competitive, and Lombardo is popular. It is really hard to take down a popular incumbent. But given what we know about the 2026 election year, it may not be good enough for the Republican Party to win. It may not be good enough for Joe Lombardo to win. And the environment might be blue enough that it gives Aaron Ford a comfortable margin in a state that he's already won by a comfortable margin before. And the question is, how much does he tap into that, and how much does he do well in the 2026 race? But only time will tell. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 governor election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.